Out there beyond the noise of Earth, the universe moves in silence. No explosions you can hear, no warnings, no explanations offered, only motion. Stars drift, planets circle, galaxies turn slowly, patiently as they have for billions of years. From a distance, it all looks orderly, predictable, almost calm. But look closer. Hidden inside that silence are things that should not exist, objects that defy the rules we use to explain everything else. Not errors, not myths, but real measured anomalies quietly rewriting what we think we know. There are stars that no longer burn, yet glow like frozen jewels in the dark. Planets hotter than the stars they orbit. Worlds where metal melts, glass rains sideways, and atmospheres are stripped away by light itself. Galaxies that seem to hold together without the invisible matter we believe is essential to their survival. These are not the loud mysteries of science fiction. They are subtler, more unsettling, because they don't announce themselves as impossible. They simply exist. Each one is a reminder that the universe was never obligated to follow our expectations, that the equations we trust are maps, not territory. Approximations drawn by minds evolved to survive on one small, quiet planet. Tonight we enter a slower orbit, not chasing answers, not searching for certainty, but listening to the anomalies, to the exceptions, to the strange, silent evidence that reality is wider, stranger and far less obedient than we imagined. Welcome to Silent Orbit. When we look up at the night sky, most of the time we imagine stars as endless flames. We grow so accustomed to that image that we forget a simple truth: every fire, no matter how vast, eventually runs out of fuel. And in the ordinary imagination, the death of a star is often tied to darkness, decay, or a cold emptiness with nothing left to tell. Yet the universe, much like the inner life of a human being, rarely follows such simple endings. There are stars that, after burning through the brightest chapter of their existence, do not dissolve into meaningless ash. They contract, they settle inward, and they enter another mode of being. White dwarfs, like Lucy BPM 37093, no longer burn, no longer blaze with violent light. Instead, they become dense, silent, and over spans of time that defy human comprehension, the carbon within them slowly crystallizes. Not into small stones one might wear on a hand, but into an entire diamond world. A solid, cold core that shines in a very different way, not with the light of fire, but with the faint glow of residual heat, a memory of warmth. Seen through the eyes of science, this is a purely physical process. Immense pressure gradually falling, temperature carbon rearranging itself into a crystalline lattice. But seen through the eyes of philosophy, it becomes a gentle metaphor for human life itself. There are phases of living when we no longer burn. No more explosive striving, no urgent need to prove, no raging fires of ambition or fear. Society often names this decline, but the universe does not. The universe calls it transformation. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Perhaps for diamond stars, the becoming does not occur during their most radiant phase, but during their quietest one. When all outer layers have fallen away, when there is nothing left to burn, essence begins to solidify, clearer, heavier, more enduring. Lucy no longer lives the way the sun lives. It no longer gives light to sustain planets. It is no longer the center of a working system. And yet it still exists as a condensed archive of billions of years of nuclear reactions, as proof that death in the universe is rarely a full stop. More often, it is simply a new line. Thinking of this at night, it is possible that some part of you too is tired. Perhaps you have burned for too long. Perhaps you are entering a quiet interval you have not yet learned to name. In that stillness, it is easy to mistake silence for emptiness, slowness for failure. But diamond stars whisper another story, that sometimes it is precisely when we stop trying to shine that we begin to crystallize. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." White dwarfs are beings almost untouched by disturbance. No stellar winds, no violent reactions, no chaos. Only pressure time and a silence so long it cannot be measured by human lives. And within that silence, the hardest forms are born. There is something deeply healing in this idea, that not all value needs to be performed, not all meaning needs to glow. Some forms of worth reveal themselves only when we remain long enough in stillness, like diamonds, formed not in daylight but in deep darkness under the uncompromising weight of time. Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." But perhaps he would also agree that after the dance, after the chaos, there is another phase. A phase in which the star no longer moves. It stands still. And it is that stillness that endures the longest. Lucy will continue to cool, to crystallize, to drift quietly through space. One day, far in the future, it will become a black dwarf, an object that emits no observable light at all. Yet even then, it will remain a colossal diamond carrying within it the entire history of a star that once lived. And perhaps as you listen to this story in the night, you do not need to understand the physics behind it. You do not need to remember the name Lucy or BPM 37093. What matters more is the gentle feeling it leaves behind, the sense that silence does not mean meaninglessness, that endings do not have to mean disappearance, and that there are forms of existence that require no light in order to be profoundly real. If you feel yourself entering a slower phase, remember the diamond stars. They do not rush. They do not compare. They do not attempt to return to their golden age. They simply continue to exist deeply, densely, quietly. And in that quiet, perhaps sleep comes more easily. Not as an escape, but as a gentle letting go. Like a star that stops burning and begins to crystallize. As the story of the diamond stars comes to a close, perhaps a strange feeling still lingers within you, a sense that death, when observed deeply and slowly enough, is not necessarily a collapse, but a kind of condensation of time. White dwarfs do not disappear. They merely withdraw from light retreat into silence, and within that silence they become enduring in a different way. And from that quiet interval, our journey drifts into a far more unstable region. If diamond stars invite us to rethink the idea of an ending, then the worlds that follow force us to question the very notion of existing correctly. For out there are planets that are not merely strange, but that seem to run entirely counter to humanity's most basic intuitions about the universe. For a long time, we believed the universe was orderly, that stars are hot and planets are cooler, that planets are dependents living off the light and heat of their parent stars, worlds that do not generate energy of their own, but merely reflect the excess of another. This belief was simple, intuitive, and sufficient until it wasn't. There are planets hotter than the stars they orbit, not because they burn themselves, not because they harbor nuclear reactions at their cores, but simply because they are too close. So close that familiar physical limits begin to warp. So close that the atmosphere ceases to be a shield and becomes a stream of matter being torn away second by second. Kelt 9b is such a world. A massive planet orbiting an extremely hot blue-white star, completing a full revolution in less than 2 days. It does not live around its star. It is dragged around it. One side is forever facing the star, locked in eternal daylight. The other endures a night that never truly cools. Temperatures are high enough to break molecules apart, strip atoms, and turn the atmosphere into an ocean of vaporized metal. Here, iron does not rest. It flies. Titanium does not crystallize. It drifts. Hydrogen is no longer molecular, but shattered into fragments blown off the planet and stretched into a long tail through space, as if the planet itself were dissolving before our eyes. Seen through a technical lens, Kelt 9b is a natural laboratory for extreme physics. But when listened to in the slow rhythm of night, it feels less like a scientific object and more like an existential question. A very quiet one. What happens when an entity is placed too close to the very thing that created it? This planet does not collapse immediately. It does not vanish at once. It keeps orbiting, keeps existing, in prolonged pain, in slow erosion. And it is this duration that invites reflection, because there are things in human life that behave the same way. They do not end suddenly. They do not shatter all at once. They simply lose a little of their original shape each day. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." But perhaps he would also recognize another kind of tragedy, not becoming a monster, but melting from standing too close to the fire. Kelt 9b is not wrong. It is simply in the wrong place. And its existence urges us to ask, are there circumstances in human psychological life that resemble this? Relationships, ideals, roles, things we stand too close to. So close that they burn us, yet we do not leave. Not because they are good, but because we have been orbiting them for too long. There is another detail that makes Kelt 9b deeply unsettling. Its orbit is almost completely misaligned. It does not circle its star along a reasonable plane. It plunges over the stellar poles as if thrown into an orbit without consent, a motion without harmony, without stability, yet still sustained. Sigmund Freud wrote in Civilization and Its Discontents, "What we call happiness in the strictest sense comes from the preferably sudden satisfaction of needs which have been dammed up to a high degree. But here there is no satisfaction, only endurance. And that too feels familiar. There are lives that do not seek happiness, only a way to survive one more revolution." Kelt 9b forces scientists to ask again what still deserves to be called a planet. When an object no longer has a stable surface, no lasting atmosphere, no thermal balance, is it still a planet? Or has it become a transitional state, a process unfolding rather than a fixed noun? And this question is not limited to astronomy. It echoes softly within the human mind. Do we need to fit a definition in order to be allowed to exist if we are in a phase of dissolution, misalignment, or evaporation? Are we still ourselves? Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations. Everything is only for a day, both that which remembers and that which is remembered. If all forms are temporary, then perhaps instability is not a mistake. It is simply a phase within a longer motion. As you listen to this story in the night, you may find yourself close to a star of your own. Something too bright, too powerful, too hot. And you are tired. Not because you are weak, but because nothing is designed to remain near fire forever. The planets that should not exist remind us that the universe does not operate by neat lists. It allows exceptions to persist. It allows misplaced forms of being. And sometimes mere existence is enough even while melting. Let this story pass through you like a very slow breeze. You do not need to remember the name Kelt 9b. You do not need to picture atoms being torn apart. Just hold on to this gentle feeling. Not every instability needs to be fixed. Some instabilities only need to be seen, acknowledged, and left alone. And as that thought settles, sleep may arrive more naturally, like a planet easing itself slightly away from its burning orbit. Not disappearing, just stepping back a little, enough to no longer be consumed. As the story of the planets that should not exist comes to a close, perhaps a fragile aftertaste still lingers within you, the sense that sometimes it is not the nature of a world that causes its suffering, but the circumstances it is forced to orbit. Kelt 9b is not wrong. It is simply too close to the fire. And in the quiet that follows this reflection, we take one more step away from orbits and temperatures towards something quieter, yet far more ruthless weather. For there are places in the universe where no collision is needed, no explosion, no sudden catastrophe. All it takes is an atmosphere. All it takes is wind. And that alone is enough to make a world untouchable. HD 1189733b is such a planet. From afar, it looks deceptively beautiful. Through telescopes, it appears wrapped in a deep blue, a color that evokes calm oceans, summer skies, the promise of life. But this is not the blue of water, not the blue of clouds. It is the blue of finely ground glass scattering light in the atmosphere. A blue sky not because it is gentle, but because it is sharp. Here, the wind does not whisper. It screams. It reaches supersonic speeds faster than any storm Earth has ever known. Molten silicate particles, the raw material of glass, do not fall downward. They are flung sideways, swept across the sky like invisible blades. Rain does not fall. Rain cuts. If one could stand there, an impossible assumption, there would be no time to feel fear. The weather would end you before consciousness could form a question. On HD 1189733b, the atmosphere is no longer protection. It is a weapon. And here science quietly touches philosophy. Because weather, in the end, is the environment a world must live with every day. Not an event, not an accident, but a baseline condition. One can avoid an explosion. One can escape a collision. But one cannot flee the atmosphere one is breathing. There are worlds destroyed not by a single violent moment, but by the merciless repetition of the same wind, the same rain, the same pressure, day after day. When seen slowly enough, this begins to resemble the inner life of a human being. Some wounds do not come from grand tragedies. They come from psychological climate, from words sharp as glass rain, from pressures repeated so often that we forget we are being cut. There is no moment dramatic enough to name as collapse. There is only erosion. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart, but perhaps he also understood a gentler truth: not every mountain is worth climbing. There are places where staying is no longer resilience, but self-harm." HD 11897333b has no surface to shelter on. It is a massive body of gas perpetually exposed to the violent flow of its surrounding environment. There is nowhere to stand still, no lee from the wind. And so weather here is not merely a phenomenon, it is destiny. The difference between this planet and Kelt 9b from the previous chapter is subtle. Kelt 9b is burned from above. HD 11897333b is shredded from all directions. One is fire, the other is blades. And both ask the same question: what happens when a world no longer has space to breathe? Carl Jung wrote in the Red Book, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. But perhaps there are places where roots cannot take hold, not for lack of depth, but because the ground itself never stays still long enough." On HD 18973b, the atmosphere is unstable. Jet streams wrap around the planet like a closed cyclone carrying heat-solid particles and violence. Balance, the condition Earth depends on to sustain life, never forms. Here there is no normal, only extremes. And perhaps you have lived in such a climate yourself, an environment where you must always be tense, where you are not attacked directly, but constantly worn down, where everything looks blue, looks fine from the outside, while inside there is an unceasing sharpness. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But sometimes the first form of strength is not endurance, but recognizing that not every climate is meant for you. HD 11897333b exists. That is what makes it worth contemplating. Despite its destructive weather, the planet still turns, still holds its form, still continues. Not because it is safe, but because the universe allows such existences to persist. Not everything must be beautiful to exist. Not everything must be gentle to be real. And strangely, this is healing, because it whispers that if you are living through a harsh phase, it does not make you less worthy. It simply means you are in a difficult climate. You do not need to turn glass rain into flower petals. You do not need to convince yourself that blade-like winds are a cool breeze. You only need to acknowledge your experience the way science acknowledges that the blue sky there is a lethal one. As you hear these words in the night, let that image dissolve slowly in your mind. A blue sky beautiful, but not meant to be lived under. And then very gently ask yourself whether there is a place in your life where leaving would not be failure, but self-preservation. No need to answer now, no need to decide. Just allow the question to exist like a cloud passing through. And as the thoughts settle, as the winds in the mind soften, sleep may arrive like a low-pressure zone, where there is no glass rain, no weather of blades, only enough calm for you to rest, like a planet briefly escaping the storm, not disappearing, just growing quiet. As the story of the glass rain comes to an end, perhaps a thin lingering chill still remains within you. Not the sharp edge of sudden fear, but the quiet realization that some worlds do not require catastrophe to become uninhabitable. All they need is climate. All they need is environment. And that is enough. In that pause, our journey turns in a different direction. No more slicing skies, no more supersonic winds. Instead, we arrive at a world strangely calm where everything looks familiar enough to be unsettling. A world that is neither violent nor hostile, yet still not meant for us. This world is Titan. Titan is Saturn's largest moon. And when we hear the word moon, we often imagine silent rocks, barren and exposed air as thin as a whisper. No weather, no movement. But Titan defies that image. It has an atmosphere thicker than Earth's. It has clouds, wind, rain. It has rivers, lakes, seas. It has a complete climate cycle differing in only one small detail that changes everything. Water here is not water. On Titan, water is hard as stone. Temperatures are too low for H2O to flow. Instead, methane and ethane take on the role that water plays on Earth. Methane clouds gather. Methane rain falls onto the frozen surface. Methane rivers wind across plains. Methane lakes shimmer beneath the distant light of the sun. Everything follows a logic that feels deeply familiar. And it is precisely this familiarity that makes Titan haunting. Because Titan is not alien in a chaotic way. It is alien in a quieter sense, the wrong material. Seen slowly enough, Titan resembles a blurred memory of early Earth, an incomplete version, a draft. All the shapes are there, but the substance is different. Like a dream in which you recognize the room, yet when you touch the objects, you realize they are no longer what you remember. There is something profoundly human in this feeling, that a world can resemble us so closely and yet be entirely uninhabitable for us. Not because it is hostile, not because it is dangerous, but because it operates on a different foundation. Martin Heidegger wrote, "In being and time, being in the world is essentially care." For humans, existence is always tied to being sustained by the surrounding environment. Earth cares for us through oxygen, water, pressure, temperature. Titan also cares for what exists upon it, just not for us. And here, science quietly touches a deeply human question. Must life resemble the life we know? Or have we unconsciously equated life with familiarity? Titan opens a gentle yet destabilizing possibility that there are complete stable forms of existence with cycles and rhythms of their own, yet with no place for humans. Not because we are insufficient, but because we were shaped for a different atmosphere. Carl Jung wrote, "In the undiscovered self, man cannot stand a meaningless life." And yet Titan suggests that meaning does not always require an observer. Some worlds do not exist to be understood. They simply exist. What deepens Titan's quiet power is its stillness. There are no supersonic storms, no glass rain. Weather on Titan is slow. Rain falls gently. Rivers move lazily. Wind drifts like a long breath. If one could stand there in a safe and impossible assumption, you would not be killed instantly. You would simply be unable to live. And sometimes that is the most difficult form of otherness to accept. Not being expelled, but being allowed to stay without the ability to endure. There are psychological environments in human life that resemble this. They are not toxic, not violent, not overtly harmful, but they do not nourish you. You do not die there. You simply diminish. Titan reminds us that not every quiet place is home. Not every structured environment is meant for us, and this carries no judgment. It is simply reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "What does not transmit light creates its own darkness." Yet Titan is not dark in that sense. It glows differently with a muted pale orange light filtered through its thick atmosphere. That light cannot sustain forests, but it is enough to reveal the shape of the world. There is one quiet but important detail beneath Titan's icy crust. There may be an ocean of liquid water, a hidden ocean. No light, no rain, no sky. Only water, salt, and rock moving slowly in darkness. If life exists there, it will never know the methane sky above. It will exist entirely unseen. And this idea is strangely gentle, that not all life needs to be seen, not all value needs to be displayed. Some forms of existence require only depth, endurance, and stillness. As you listen to this story in the night, you may find yourself thinking of places that once felt like home but no longer fit. Not because they became wrong, but because your inner atmosphere has changed. You require a different pressure, a different temperature, a different composition of air. Titan did not fail because it lacks water. It simply remained faithful to methane. And in that fidelity, it became one of the most complex and beautiful worlds we know. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "We have art in order not to die of the truth." Perhaps science serves a similar purpose. It tells us about Titan, not so that we may dream of living there, but so that we may understand that life and meaning can take far more forms than we imagine. As this thought settles, let Titan drift slowly through your mind. A moon that does not shout, does not threaten, does not invite. It simply exists according to its own rhythm. And if within you there arises a very gentle sense that you do not need to fit into every world, that you are allowed to leave places that no longer nourish you. Then perhaps Titan has finished whispering its story. Sleep now may arrive like a thin veil of methane fog, not heavy, not deep, just enough to soften the light so that you may rest, like a distant moon, not needing to resemble Earth, only needing to be itself. As the story of Titan comes to a close, perhaps something difficult to name still lingers within you. Not fear and not quite wonder, but a gentle confusion. The sense that there are worlds that function fully steadily with climate rhythm and their own quiet beauty, yet are not meant for humans. Not hostile, not violent, simply a different atmosphere. And from that silent difference, our journey moves inward once more. No more methane skies. No more sunlight filtered through pale orange haze. We leave the surface behind. We leave places that still know day and night. And we enter a realm that for a very long time humanity is unconsciously associated with the absence of life-complete darkness. Beneath ice layers tens, even hundreds of kilometers thick, Enceladus, Europa, and Titan as well conceal vast oceans. No sunlight, no dawn, no dusk. Only liquid water pressure, rock salt, and quiet heat rising from within their cores. Oceans that are never illuminated yet may never have been dead. Enceladus, a small moon of Saturn, erupts with towering plumes of water that burst through its icy shell and shoot directly into space. Within those plumes, spacecraft have detected hydrogen salts, organic compounds, ingredients that feel uncannily familiar. Europa, a moon of Jupiter, hides beneath its fractured ice an ocean deeper than all of Earth's oceans combined. Titan, beyond its surface rivers and lakes of methane, may also be sheltering a liquid water ocean in absolute darkness. Here, water is not warmed by light. It remains liquid through gravity, through tidal friction, through geothermal energy. There is no photosynthesis, no requirement for illumination. If life exists there, it would rely on chemistry, on minerals, on reactions between rock and water. A form of existence that does not need to be seen in order to continue. And this quietly unsettles one of humanity's oldest assumptions, that light is a prerequisite for life. That only what is illuminated can grow, can matter, can carry meaning. Aristotle once wrote in Metaphysics, "The soul never thinks without an image." Yet these hidden oceans whisper another possibility, that there are forms of existence that require no image, no light, no witness, and still persist. The idea of a habitable zone was once drawn neatly around stars. Not too hot, not too cold, liquid water on the surface. But Enceladus and Europa render those circles obsolete. They reveal that life may arise far from stars, without direct light, without even a surface to walk upon. Habitable, perhaps, is not a place in space. It is an internal condition. This echoes softly into human life. There are periods when you are no longer illuminated, not recognized, not seen, not reflected back through the eyes of others. Society often calls this being lost, but the hidden oceans tell a different story. That darkness does not necessarily mean absence. It can be an environment. Carl Jung wrote in Psychology and Alchemy, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. Darkness, when deep enough and stable enough, does not destroy. It preserves. In subsurface oceans, there are no storms, no extreme weather, no glass rain, no knife-like winds. Only slow movement, quiet currents, steady pressure. A rhythm of life, if it exists, sustained not by competing for light, but by adapting to silence." There is something deeply healing in this image. That not all growth must reach upward. Not all maturation requires direct light. Some forms of becoming move inward, downward, deeper. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Dig within." Within is the wellspring of good, and it is always ready to bubble up if you will dig. Perhaps the hidden oceans are the universe's reminder that the source of life does not always lie on the surface. If life exists on Enceladus or Europa, it will never know the sky. It will never see starlight. It will not know day or night, and yet it will exchange energy, adapt, continue. Not because it is seen, but because conditions allow it. And sometimes that is enough. Within your inner life, there are parts of you much like these oceans, parts that have never been illuminated, emotions, memories, capacities that never rise to the surface. not because they are wrong, but because they do not require light to exist. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But perhaps before the dancing star, there must be a dark ocean long enough, deep enough to gather the energy that makes it possible. As you listen to this story in the night, notice how your body responds to the idea that life does not need light. You may feel lighter, as if you no longer have to force yourself to shine at all times, as if you are allowed to retreat inward to exist quietly, to live without proving anything. Hidden oceans do not need to be seen to be real. They do not need to be named to hold meaning. They require only sufficient conditions and time, and perhaps sleep is much the same. Not the shutting down of consciousness, but a different environment in which the mind continues its work more gently, more deeply. Without light, let Enceladus Europa and Titan drift slowly through your thoughts. Sunless oceans, rhythms without dawn, worlds that teach us that darkness is not always an ending. Sometimes it is where things are kept safe, and in that quiet sleep may arrive like a warm current in deep shadow. No light required, only enough safety to let go. As the story of the lightless oceans comes to a close, perhaps something very deep still lingers within you. A sense that life does not have to be loud. It does not need to be illuminated. It does not need to be seen in order to continue. Beneath thick ice and eternal darkness, hidden oceans still move, still retain warmth, still hold the possibility of something fragile, yet enduring. And from that deep darkness, our journey slowly returns to the light, but not the radiant light of beginnings. Instead, it is a distorted light, a wounded light, a light that persists after everything should have ended, because not every death in the universe is complete. Not every explosion erases all traces of what once was. There are stars that have passed through the most destructive moment nature can create and still remain. In the human imagination, a supernova is an absolute full stop. An explosion powerful enough to tear atoms apart, bright enough to outshine entire galaxies for a brief instant. We are accustomed to treating it as a final conclusion that when a star explodes, everything must end. But the universe, as always, refuses the tidy endings we expect. LP 4365 is such an exception. A star that was once part of a binary system. A star that once stood too close to its companion. When the explosion occurred, a Type Ia supernova, most of its material was blown away. But not all of it. What remained was neither the original star nor invisible ash. It was a wounded core, scorched, stripped of much of its mass, and hurled away from what had once been home at tremendous speed. LP 4365 now drifts through the galaxy. No stable orbit, no stellar system, no complete memory of its former shape. It carries the imprint of the explosion, unusual elements, distorted density, and unbalanced structure. And for that reason, it bears a haunting name, a zombie star. A star that has died but has not disappeared. Seen through science, this is a rare and valuable case helping us understand the mechanics of supernova. But when heard in the slow rhythm of night, L 4365 raises a profoundly human question: what happens when an entity passes through the moment that should have ended it and still exists? Perhaps it is no longer itself as it once was, but it is still something. Carl Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. Surviving destruction may be one of those problems. There is no complete answer. Only unfinished forms of being. Zombie stars do not return to their previous state. They do not recover. They do not reclaim a golden age. They simply continue in another form with another history and with scars that cannot be erased. This echoes softly into human life. There are events we believe we will not survive. Psychological explosions, losses, ruptures that collapse every definition of who we were. And then quietly, we still wake up the next day. Not the same as before, not intact, but still here." Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Twilight of the Idols, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." But perhaps this is only partly true. Not everything that fails to kill us makes us stronger. Some things simply make us different. And that difference does not need to be labeled progress or failure. It is merely a new state of existence. LP 4365 is not stronger after the explosion. It is weaker, lighter, injured, But it is also free of its former orbit, no longer bound to the binary system that once defined it. It drifts without clear purpose, without a center, without promises. And it is precisely this drifting that allows it to exist. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditation's Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. To the universe, a star surviving its own death is not a paradox. It is simply a rare form of transformation. There are other stars with similar fates, wounded cores, remnants that do not dissolve, entities expelled from what once belonged to them. They do not return. They do not attempt to repair the past. They simply continue drifting, carrying the history of an explosion that can never be witnessed again. And perhaps the most healing part of this story lies not in survival itself, but in the absence of any need to return to who one once was. You do not need to be whole to be allowed to exist. You do not need to be fully healed to continue living. The universe allows unfinished forms of being to persist for millions, even billions of years. It does not rush to conclusions. Zombie stars remind us that sometimes simply still being here is already a very quiet achievement. No glory required, no proof demanded, just continued motion. As you listen to this story in the night, you may sense that within you too there is a part that believes it died somewhere in the past. A former version that no longer exists. A shape that collapsed. And if so, let LP-4365 whisper something very gently that your continued presence, even changed, even no longer as before, is not wrong. Sigmund Freud wrote in Beyond the Pleasure Principle, "The aim of all life is death, but the universe seems to add a small footnote. The path there is never a straight line. Some things move in circles, some things stop midway, some things continue living in forms no one could have predicted. And as that thought settles, sleep may arrive not as a shutting down, but as a necessary pause, like a wounded star that no longer burns fiercely, yet still emits enough light to say, 'I am still here.' Let consciousness ease downward very gently. No need to recover, no need to be complete, just rest." As the universe has allowed stars that survived death to continue drifting quietly onward, as the story of stars that survived their own death comes to an end, perhaps a very quiet feeling still echoes within you. The sense that some things passed through destruction never return to their former shape and yet continue to exist like wounded fragments of life drifting through the universe without the need for justification. LP-4365 does not return to its old orbit. It does not repair the past. It simply continues carrying the scar of an explosion that has already happened. And from that slow, wounded, almost weary mode of being, our journey suddenly shifts to the opposite extreme. No longer drifting, no longer the aftershock of death, but speed, a speed so great that reality itself begins to tremble. For there are objects in the universe that do not survive by enduring, but by spinning so fast they nearly cease to exist. Neutron stars are such entities. They are born from the deaths of massive stars. When the stellar core collapses, everything is compressed beyond imagination, a mass greater than the sun squeezed into a sphere only a few tens of kilometers wide. At that point, atoms can no longer hold their form. Electrons and protons are crushed together until they merge. Matter becomes a state that no longer fits any familiar name. And then many neutron stars begin to spin. Not slowly like Earth, not gently like calm planets, but hundreds of rotations per second. Some neutron stars spin more than 700 times every second, so fast that if they rotated even slightly faster, centrifugal force itself would tear them apart. This is a boundary, not a moral boundary, not a conceptual one, but an absolute physical limit. Beyond this speed lies disintegration. Here, reality is no longer soft. It is stretched like a string pulled to its final tension. Space bends. Time slows. Magnetic fields grow strong enough to rip apart atomic structures. And yet the neutron star holds its shape not because it is stable, but because it is balanced on a blade. Seen through science, this is a triumph of equations. But when heard in the slow rhythm of night, the neutron star poses a deeply human question. What happens when a being exists at the very edge of what it can endure? Some lives are like this, not collapsed, not shattered, but always near the limit, always spinning fast, always tense, always holding everything together with a force no one can see. Heraclitus once wrote in his fragments, "Everything flows, nothing stands still." Yet neutron stars reveal a paradox. There are things that remain intact only by moving without rest. The rotation of a neutron star is not a choice, it is a consequence. As the core collapses, the conservation of angular momentum forces it to spin faster like a figure skater pulling their arms inward. There is no will, no intention, only physics. And it is precisely this indifference of nature that makes the story feel closer to us, because humans too are often drawn into motions they did not choose, accelerating rhythms of life, rising expectations, layered roles. And then one day we realize we are spinning faster than we can sustain, yet still not stopping. Seneca wrote in On the Shortness of Life, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. But perhaps in an age of speed, the problem is not only wasted time, it is being pulled into a rotation that leaves no room to rest." Neutron stars have no option to pause. They cannot slow themselves at will. When they lose energy, they emit steady radio pulses like a cosmic heartbeat pulsars announcing that they still exist. Each pulse is a quiet message: I am still here. I have not yet broken. And what is worth contemplating is this: not all neutron stars spin fast forever. Over time, they lose energy, they slow, they age. Yet the moment when they spin the fastest, the moment of greatest tension, is also when they are most clearly defined. Perhaps humans are the same. There are phases when you live near the limit. You do more than you thought possible. You endure more than you believed you could, not because you were meant to live that way, but because circumstances forced you to spin faster. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time Anxiety reveals the nothing. At extreme speed, everything unnecessary falls away. Only the essential remains. A neutron star has no outer layers, no complex forms, only a core. And in inner life, the most intense periods sometimes do the same. They strip away assumptions, side stories, unnecessary roles. They reveal what is truly holding you to life. But neutron stars also remind us of something very gentle: every limit exists for a reason. Exceed the rotational limit and the star disintegrates. Exceed the limits of endurance and humans do as well. Not as judgment, but as a reminder that some rhythms do not need to be maintained forever. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. The universe does not demand that neutron stars spin at maximum speed eternally, and perhaps it does not require you to live at the edge of speed for your entire life either." As you listen to this story in the night, try to sense the rotation within yourself, not to fix it, not to adjust it, just to notice. You may realize that you have been spinning very fast for a long time, and that realization alone is already a form of slowing. Neutron stars exist at the boundary of matter, but you do not need to live there to have worth. You do not need to prove how much centrifugal force you can endure. You do not need to stand at the edge of disintegration to earn rest. Let consciousness ease downward like an object gradually losing energy, not collapsing, not disappearing, simply slowing. From spinning to moving, from moving to stillness, like a neutron star that after spinning fast enough to be seen is finally allowed to slow quietly into silence. As the story of neutron stars spinning at nearly unbearable speeds comes to a close, perhaps an echo of that tense rotation still lingers within you. A sense that some forms of existence remain intact only by moving continuously, by holding themselves at the very edge of disintegration. Yet if in the previous chapter that edge was sustained by speed, here it is held by something quieter, deeper, and far more dangerous: magnetism. For there are stars that do not need to spin fast to become extreme. They need only to compress until matter no longer knows what it is, to compress until reality itself begins to fracture from within. These are magnetars. Magnetars are a rare form of neutron star. They are not remarkable for their size, not for steady light, nor for record-breaking rotation. They are remarkable because they carry the strongest magnetic fields ever known in the universe. Fields so powerful that if a magnetar were to pass Earth at the distance of the moon, it could disrupt the molecules within your body. So strong that within thousands of kilometers, atomic structures can no longer hold their familiar shape. Here, matter is not merely pulled, it is twisted. Magnetars are born from the most violent deaths, yet that death does not free them. On the contrary, it locks everything in place. The stellar core collapses, matter is compressed until neutrons nearly touch one another, and the magnetic field, usually a secondary actor, becomes the dominant force. Not gravity, not nuclear reactions, but magnetism, invisible, silent, and overwhelming. And when that magnetic field rearranges itself, when the neutron star's crystalline crust, harder than steel, can no longer withstand the pressure, starquakes occur. Earthquakes not on land but within the core of a star. The crust fractures. Energy is released in an instant, and the universe hears it as a violent whisper. Gamma ray bursts fast, radio bursts, FRBs. Brief signals, without warning, without predictable repetition. They appear and vanish, as if the universe itself has momentarily twitched. Seen through science, starquakes are an inevitable consequence of extreme matter, but when heard in the slow rhythm of night, magnetars tell a different story, a story of fractures that cannot be avoided. There are pressures that cannot be released through motion, that cannot be discharged through speed. They accumulate, they compress, and eventually, no matter how strong the shell, a crack will appear. Carl Jung wrote in Psychology and Religion, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Magnetars seem to embody this cosmic truth. Awareness, if it exists, does not arise from smoothness. It arises from fractures within structures that once seemed unbreakable. Starquakes do not destroy magnetars completely. They leave scars, small fissures in the crystalline crust. Yet it is precisely these fissures that allow energy to escape. Without cracks, there are no signals. Without rupture, there is no whisper capable of traveling billions of light years. And this touches human inner life very gently. There are people who are very hard, very stable, very disciplined. They do not spin wildly like neutron stars. They do not drift like zombie stars. They stand still. They hold everything inside. Until one day a crack appears. Not because they are weak, but because the pressure has lasted too long. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But magnetars remind us that before the dancing star, there must be a shell capable of enduring immense compression. And when it finally fractures, the light that escapes is not gentle, it is violent, but brief. FRBs are exactly that. Radio pulses so fast they last only milliseconds. Yet in that instant, the energy released can exceed the sun's output over many years. A whisper powerful enough to be heard from the other side of the universe. There is something deeply healing in this image. That not every expression needs to last long, not every release needs explanation. Sometimes a single moment is enough to say, "I have endured." Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In magnetars, the very obstacle, the rigid crust, the overwhelming magnetic field, becomes the path through which energy is released. Without resistance, there are no starquakes. These stars are not stable in the way humans prefer. They are not gentle. They are not regular, but they are honest to their structure. When they can no longer endure, they fracture. And after the echo fades, they return to silence. In human life, perhaps we must learn this as well. Not every crack is failure. Not every outburst is a mistake. Some violent moments are necessary so that the structure does not collapse entirely. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, "The most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking." Perhaps the mind's own starquakes, moments of breaking, are when true thinking begins. Magnetars do not remain in their extreme state forever. Over time, their magnetic fields weaken. Starquakes become rarer. They grow quieter. Not because they are repaired, but because energy has been released. And this leads to a very gentle conclusion. Pressure does not need to be held forever. It does not need to accumulate until it becomes dangerous. It does not need to prove infinite endurance. The universe allows moments of fracture and then allows silence to return. As you listen to this story in the night, notice whether there is pressure building within you. Not to solve it, not to fix it, only to recognize it. Perhaps that recognition alone is already a very small crack, enough to let energy escape, enough to make you lighter. Magnetars remind us that even the strongest structures must be allowed to fracture, not in order to collapse, but in order to continue. And as that thought settles, sleep may arrive like the quiet after a quake. No noise, no blinding light, Just a very real stillness when the shell has ceased to strain and the magnetic field within begins to soften. Let your mind rest. No need to be harder. No need to endure more. Like a magnetar that after releasing what must be released is finally allowed to be still. As the faint echo of magnetars still lingers within the fabric of silence, stars that fracture from within and then return to stillness, our journey drifts into another region of darkness. If in the previous chapter the universe whispered through violent convulsions, here it becomes completely silent. No explosions, no light, no reverberation. Only the slow motion of those who have been severed from every center. For beyond stellar fractures, beyond starquakes and roaring magnetic fields, the universe holds another kind of existence, not violent, not radiant, but so quiet that we easily forget it is still there. These are rogue planets. Planets without stars. They once belonged to a system, once orbited a sun, once had an orbit, a rhythm, a clear place within a larger structure. And then, through chaotic gravitational interactions, a giant planet shifting inward, a nearby star passing too close, an ancient collision, they were flung outward. Not because of error, not because of weakness, simply because the universe does not privilege stability. And so they wander. No sun to illuminate them. No dawn, no dusk. No year to measure time. Only motion through darkness. In astronomy, rogue planets are understood as an inevitable outcome of planetary formation. As massive bodies migrate as gravity pulls, pushes, and tears initial structures apart, the lighter ones are often expelled. There is no intention, no conspiracy, only the mathematics of chaos. But when listened to in the slow rhythm of night, these planets tell another story, a story of existence without a center. They do not shine. They do not reflect starlight. And yet they exist. They carry mass. They carry history. They continue to move even with nowhere to return to. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." Rogue planets feel like a cosmic embodiment of that idea. No external purpose, no reward, no guiding light, only continuation. There is something deeply healing in this image. That not every existence needs to be seen, that not every journey requires a sun at its center, that not every motion must revolve around a source of light in order to be valid. In the deep darkness between stars, the temperature of rogue planets can fall close to absolute zero. Yet not all of them freeze into lifelessness. Some may retain heat from radioactive cores. Some may harbor subsurface oceans warmed by pressure and internal friction. Life, if it exists there, would not know light. It would know warmth, movement, chemistry. And this quietly expands the idea of what it means to be habitable, to live without being illuminated. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." Rogue planets gaze into the abyss not to fight it, not to conquer it, but to remain within it. They do not treat darkness as a challenge. They live in it as a natural condition. And here the story moves very close to human life. There are phases when we no longer feel that we belong to any system. No familiar orbit, no clear center, no light by which to measure time. Old relationships dissolve. Structures that once held us steady fall away. We do not explode like stars. We do not fracture like magnetars. We simply drift. Rogue planets remind us that drifting is not failure. It is a valid state of existence. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." When there is no external sun, perhaps we are forced to discover another form of warmth, not light, but presence. Scientists estimate that the number of rogue planets in the Milky Way may equal or even exceed the number of stars, which means darkness is not the exception. It is the majority. The universe is not built primarily from neat systems. It is filled with the displaced, the uncentered, the journeys without clear destinations. And still, the universe continues. Martin Heidegger wrote, "In being and time, being is essentially an issue for it. Existence does not need to be proven by light. It only needs to be lived through." Rogue planets do not know they are rogue. They do not compare. They do not regret. They do not ask why they were expelled. They simply respond to the remaining pull of gravity, to their own inertia. There is a deep calm in that. And as you listen to this story in the night, perhaps you too can allow yourself to release the question, where am I supposed to be, and replace it with a gentler one. Am I still here? No system, no light, no map, and yet still existing. Rogue planets do not end their journey, they only leave a structure. And perhaps in leaving, they are freed from having to orbit anything other than their own motion. As this thought settles, darkness becomes less frightening. It turns into a wide space where no one watches, no one judges, no one demands. Only you and the quiet reality of still drifting slow enough not to disintegrate, calm enough not to disappear. Let this story carry you into sleep like a planet without a star, no light required. No center needed, only the permission to exist in silence. As the story of rogue planets comes to a close, those starless worlds drifting without a center existing in deep darkness, perhaps a very unusual feeling has settled within you. Not fear, but a form of acceptance. The sense that not everything needs to be anchored, that some forms of existence continue even after leaving every familiar structure behind. And from that drifting, the night carries us into an even more fragile state. If in the previous chapter the planet was cast out, yet remained whole here, there are planets that do not merely leave their systems, they are dissolving even as we observe them. They do not vanish in an instant. They do not explode. They do not collapse loudly. They melt slowly, layer by layer. These are planets falling into the embrace of their parent stars, too close to retain an atmosphere, too close to preserve their shape, too close to remain a planet as we once understood the word. Light is no longer a source of life. It becomes an erosive force. Stellar wind is no longer a breath. It is an invisible blade stripping molecules from the surface, leaving behind a long, sorrowful tail. In astronomy, this process can be measured. Spectral lines reveal sodium-hydrogen silicates being blown away. Transit curves lose their clean symmetry. They stretch and distort the signature of a body slowly losing itself. Destruction here is not speculation. It is data. But when heard in the slow rhythm of night, these disintegrating planets are more than physical phenomena. They become metaphors for time, for relationships that once sustained us, then gradually became unbearable. There are things we stand too close to. There are sources of light we place too centrally. And then that very closeness begins to strip away what we need in order to exist. Heraclitus wrote as recorded by Plato, "Everything flows and nothing abides." On these planets, flow is no longer an idea. It is a measurable reality. Second by second, hour by hour, orbit by orbit, they lose a tiny fraction of themselves. Not enough to notice immediately, but enough that after millions of years, nothing remains to hold. Slow destruction is always harder to recognize than sudden collapse. It raises no alarm. It demands no decision. It simply continues. And this touches human life very gently. There are phases when we do not break. We go to work, we speak, we fulfill responsibilities. Yet somewhere inside, part of the atmosphere is being torn away. Curiosity, rest, freedom. Things that cannot be seen directly, but whose absence leaves us exposed. Albert Camus wrote in The Plague, "What's natural is the microbe. All the rest, health, integrity, purity, is a product of the human will. Remaining intact, it turns out, is not a default state. It is a quiet effort against invisible forces. These dissolving planets do not choose destruction. They simply remain too close for too long. Not because of moral failure, but because gravity does not care about intention. It only does what it does. And science offers the most unsettling realization of all we are observing this process as it happens. Not in a distant past, not in an abstract future, but in the present, a present where loss is slow enough to record, clear enough to understand, yet not fast enough to intervene. Martin Heidegger wrote, "In being and time, being toward death is the anticipation of a possibility." Here, death does not arrive as a moment. It arrives as a possibility gradually becoming real. There is something quietly healing in looking directly at slow disintegration. It teaches us to recognize early signs, not to panic, but to adjust distance. Not every light should be approached. Not every gravitational pull is worth remaining within. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Perhaps in the language of the universe, this becomes if an orbit is draining life. Step back, not dramatically but gently. These planets teach us that disintegration is not always failure. Sometimes it is information, a signal that conditions have changed, that structures once suitable are no longer so, that existence now requires a different form or a different distance. And as you listen to this story in the night, perhaps you do not need a grand answer. Simply listen to your own rhythm. Is there something being stripped away too long? Is there a light shining too close? Is there a pull that has been thinning your atmosphere without you noticing? Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, one must learn to love oneself with a healthy and sane love so that one can bear to be with oneself and need not roam. Sometimes loving oneself means adjusting one's orbit. Slow destruction can be measured, but slow restoration can be measured too through very small changes. By allowing a little darkness in which to breathe, by no longer staying too close to what dissolves you. As this thought settles, the story grows lighter. It becomes a gentle reminder not all breaking is loud, not all loss is obvious. But if we are slow enough to listen, calm enough to notice, we can adjust before it is too late. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like a loosened orbit. No hurry, no alarm. Just a very gentle step back, enough for the atmosphere to return, enough for you to continue existing in peace. As the story of disintegrating planets comes to a close, worlds slowly losing their atmospheres in the too close embrace of light, perhaps a very gentle realization has formed within you: not every loss is born of violence. Some forms of destruction unfold slowly, evenly, with such precision that we only recognize them once we are already halfway through. And from that slow rhythm, the night carries us away from individual bodies toward larger structures, galaxies. Here, the anomaly no longer lies in the decay of a single planet, but in the existence of entire systems that seem to defy what we believe to be fundamental. There are galaxies without dark matter. There are galaxies older than the age the universe itself seems to allow. They stand there faint, fragile, undeniable, and their very presence unsettles the rules we rely on to understand everything else. DF2 and DF4 faint galaxies in the NGC 1052 group appear almost like ghosts. They are nearly as wide as the Milky Way, yet contain only a fraction of its stars. When astronomers measured the velocities of star clusters within them, the result emerged quietly but decisively. There is almost no dark matter, no invisible scaffolding to hold everything together, no gravitational glue that standard models insist is necessary for galaxies to exist. And yet they persist. If dark matter is a required condition, why do these exceptions not collapse? If rules are universal, why do some cases refuse to obey them? The question does not arrive like thunder. It arrives like a hairline crack in the foundation of certainty. Thomas Kuhn wrote in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, anomaly appears only against the background provided by the paradigm. Exceptions do not destroy knowledge. They locate it, revealing the boundaries of what we currently believe. It is not only galaxies that seem to lack dark matter. There are also galaxies that are too old, structures that stopped forming stars when the universe itself was still young. Their light reveals heavy elements, traces of multiple generations of stars already born and dead too early, too fast, as if they had completed their lives before the larger script had even begun. Here, time no longer moves uniformly. History no longer lines up neatly. There are places in the universe that moved ahead and then stopped, not because they ran out of meaning, but because conditions changed. And this comes very close to human experience. There are periods in life when we complete certain lessons too early. We grow old in thought while still young in years. We understand things our surroundings have not yet caught up to. Not everyone moves on schedule. Not every form of maturation arrives at the expected time. Albert Camus wrote in The Rebel, "The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world." These overly old galaxies carry that unreasonable silence within them. They do not explain themselves. They simply exist, forcing us to face the possibility that the world does not promise coherence. DF2 and DF4 are called dangerous anomalies, not because they threaten the universe, but because they threaten intellectual comfort. They remind us that models are maps, not territory. That what we call laws are often habits confirmed many times until they are not. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, the possible ranks higher than the actual. Possibility is always wider than the reality we currently see. These galaxies expand that possibility, not through words, but through quiet existence. What is healing here is not the immediate discovery of answers. It is permission. Permission for science to say we do not yet know. Permission for thought to rest from the pressure of absolute consistency. Permission for oneself not to fit perfectly into every framework. In life, there are people who do not have enough of what is said to be necessary resources, support foundations, and yet they stand. There are people who complete emotional life cycles very early and then enter a long stillness. We often call them unusual, but perhaps they are simply valid exceptions. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything suits me that suits your designs, O my universe." To accept exceptions is not to abandon order, but to widen the hospitality of order itself. These galaxies do not deny dark matter. They do not reject the entire model. They simply say not everywhere, not always, not under every condition. And it is precisely this humility that keeps science alive, just as humility keeps the human mind supple. As you listen to this story in the night, let it soften the pressure to be correct. Perhaps you do not have what others think is required. Perhaps your timing does not align with the common clock. Perhaps you move too fast or stop too early. That does not make you wrong. It simply makes you uncommon. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. But sometimes what is needed is not chaos, but the courage to remain with one's own exception." And as this thought settles, galaxies that break the rules no longer feel threatening. They become gentle reminders that understanding is a journey, not a finished structure. That exceptions do not collapse foundations, they open windows. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like a faint galaxy. No need to prove, no need to conform, only to exist and to let the silence of the universe continue teaching us how to listen. Part 12 is the story of rule-breaking galaxies slowly settles structures that persist despite lacking what was once considered their very foundation. Perhaps a thin hush has formed within you. A moment of quiet hesitation where a question begins to arise if what we cannot see can determine the shape of everything. Then, how many things are holding us up that we have never learned to name, and from that question, the night carries us deeper into darkness. No longer into isolated exceptions, no longer into galaxies out of sync, but into the invisible framework of the entire universe, something present everywhere governing all motion, yet never revealing its face. This is dark matter. Dark matter does not emit light. It does not reflect or absorb it. It leaves no direct trace for the human eye. And yet without it, galaxies would not rotate as they do. Star clusters would not coalesce. Large-scale structures would not hold their shape. The universe as we ordinarily understand it would fall apart. Dark matter is like an invisible skeleton. You do not see it in the mirror, but without it, the body could not stand. You do not touch it yet, every movement depends on its silent presence. And what is remarkable is this: we do not believe in dark matter because it is elegant or appealing, but because the universe behaves as if it exists. The Bullet Cluster offers one of the rare moments when the universe shows this truth almost directly. Two galaxy clusters collide. Hot gas, which makes up most of the ordinary matter, slows down and glows in X-rays. But most of the mass is not there. It has passed straight through without colliding, without stopping, leaving only its gravitational imprint behind. The map of mass separates from the map of light, as if the universe were quietly saying what holds everything together is not what you see. Immanuel Kant wrote in Critique of Pure Reason, "Thoughts without content are empty, intuitions without concepts are blind. Dark matter is like content without form. We cannot intuit it, but without the concept our observations become blind. And dark matter is not alone. There is also dark flow, a mysterious collective motion of galaxy clusters that seem to drift together in a single direction beyond what cosmic expansion alone can explain. As if a pull from far beyond the observable horizon were influencing vast regions of space. No one knows for certain what dark flow is. It may be the imprint of structures beyond our cosmic horizon. It may be a statistical anomaly. It may be a reminder that our map is still unfinished. but the importance lies not in the answer but in the feeling it evokes. The universe is not only held together from within, but also called toward places we cannot see. Here, science comes very close to a deeply human experience, the sense of being supported by things that have never been acknowledged. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, "That which is closest is what is farthest away. The nearest foundations, the silent ones, are often the least noticed." In life, there are unnamed supports. A small habit, an old memory, someone who appeared at exactly the right moment, then disappeared. A vague belief that tomorrow will be gentler. We do not call these things structures. We only know that without them, everything would collapse. Dark matter carries no meaning. It does not care. It is neither benevolent nor cruel. Yet it is precisely this indifference that makes it reliable. It does not change because we observe it. It does not vanish because we doubt it. It simply does its work, holding structure in place. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." Dark matter does not serve individual stars. It serves the whole structure. And because of that, each small part is allowed to remain. The healing in this chapter does not come from understanding everything. It comes from accepting that not all foundations need to be illuminated. Some things are best left in darkness, unexamined, unjudged, unburdened by the need to explain themselves. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "We have art in order not to die of the truth." Perhaps we also have darkness for the same reason, so we are not crushed by the need to see everything, know everything, control everything. Dark flow reminds us that we are shaped not only by what surrounds us now, but also by distant currents along history's forces that began before we arrived. We do not need to resist them. We only need to move slowly enough not to be swept away. As you listen to this story in the night, you do not need to imagine what dark matter looks like. Simply feel this idea. There are things holding you up that you do not need to thank every day. There are forces keeping you steady when you believe you are falling. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer." Perhaps that invincible summer is an invisible framework within, not bright, not loud, but strong enough to let you continue. And as this thought softens, the universe no longer feels frightening in its vastness. It becomes comforting in its structure even when that structure cannot be seen. Not everything is random. Not all drifting is meaningless. There are forces keeping rhythm even when we cannot hear them. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like an invisible framework. No light required, no name needed, only enough strength to allow you to let go into the darkness and rest within the quiet support of the universe. As the idea of the universe's invisible framework slowly settles as we accept that there are forces of support that do not need to be seen, a new question begins to open broader and slower. If dark matter is the skeleton, if dark flow is the hidden current, then what does the body of the universe look like when we step far enough back? And in that very act of stepping back, we begin to see the largest structures ever discovered. No longer stars, no longer planets, no longer individual galaxies, but immense networks stretching across billions of light years, where galaxies are linked like faint threads in the dark, great walls, cosmic filaments. Names that sound solid, yet are really just our attempts to label a form too vast to hold in the mind. The cosmic web is the natural outcome of gravity acting upon dark matter across the history of the universe. From tiny fluctuations after the Big Bang, matter began to gather, stretch, and connect, forming filaments, nodes, and vast empty voids between them. Galaxies are not scattered at random. They assemble along pathways, along currents, along structure. At the largest scale, the universe is not an even cloud of dust. It resembles a nervous system more than anything else, with conduits, intersections, and deep silences between. What causes scientists to pause is not that these structures exist, but how large they are. Some great walls exceed what standard theory allows. They extend too far, too coherently, too orderly for the assumption that at sufficiently large scales the universe should become homogeneous, the same in every direction everywhere. And so a very old, very human question returns in a new form. Is the universe truly uniform? And if it is not, what does that mean for how we understand order, randomness, and our own place within it? Baruch Spinoza wrote in Ethics, "The more we understand individual things, the more we understand God. But when those individual things connect into structures beyond prediction understanding, no longer brings complete reassurance. It opens further layers of uncertainty. Great walls do not break the universe. They break the comfort of the model. They suggest that at immense scales, the universe may still carry imprints of its earliest history, that primordial ripples were never fully smoothed out, that uniformity, if it exists at all, is only approximate. This does not make the universe more chaotic. It makes it more real, because human life is much the same. We often long for uniformity, that people should mature the same way, grieve the same way, heal the same way. Yet when we look closely and from far enough away, we find great walls within ourselves, long memory pathways, belief structures, formed very early deep connections that do not easily dissolve. Carl Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "The psyche is not of today. Its ancestry goes back many millions of years. The human mind too contains ancient, expansive structures, uneven beneath the surface. Cosmic filaments are not loud. They do not shine brightly. They appear only when we patiently assemble data, when we accept blurred regions. And perhaps the same is true of the largest structures in inner life. They reveal themselves not through momentary emotion, but through the long rhythm of experience. If the universe is not perfectly homogeneous, then perhaps difference is not an error. It is a trace of history." Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, "The past is not past. At the cosmic scale, the past remains inscribed in structure. At the human scale, what has been lived does the same. It does not vanish, it shapes." Great walls show us that not everything must be flattened to become coherent. There are long lines, enduring connections, subtle but persistent asymmetries that form the final shape. This does not make the universe less beautiful. It gives it depth. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Human, All Too Human, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." Yet here we see the reverse: small individuals, galaxies, stars are supported by vast structures, not erased but placed in relation. There is something deeply comforting in this image, that we do not need to be uniform in order to belong. That difference does not sever us from the whole, but weaves us in each in a unique way. As you listen to this chapter in the night, try to imagine yourself as a very small point within a very large network. You do not need to understand its full shape. You do not need to know where it ends, only to feel that you are connected even when that connection is not always visible. Albert Einstein once said, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." And perhaps what is even more worth contemplating is this: it is not entirely comprehensible, and it is precisely that which keeps curiosity alive. The largest structures do not threaten peace, they expand it. They allow us to loosen the need to simplify everything, to make everything neat, to force the universe or ourselves into straight lines. The universe may not be perfectly uniform, but it is consistent in its own way, consistent in allowing difference to exist without collapse. And as this thought softens, you may let your mind drift along the invisible cosmic filaments. No destination, no map, just a slow, gentle motion within a structure wide enough to contain every deviation. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like the cosmic web itself. Vast, slow, not perfectly uniform, yet steady enough to let you rest at any point within the quiet peace of something far larger than yourself. As the image of the universe's largest structures slowly dissolves into the dark, the great walls stretching on the cosmic filaments weaving an immense network, perhaps a very natural feeling arises within you. If there are places so dense, then where is the emptiness? And it is from this question that the night leads us to a realm spoken of less often, yet no less essential cosmic voids. The empty regions of the universe, not random gaps, not structural errors, but vast domains where very few galaxies exist, regions that occupy most of the universe's volume. On large-scale maps of the cosmos, voids appear like enormous bubbles enclosed by filaments of dark matter and galaxies. They are not what is left over. They are a direct outcome of structure formation itself. When matter gathers in one place, it must leave another. As filaments thicken, emptiness expands. Void is not lack. Void is a consequence of order, and this shifts how we understand absence. For if voids are an indispensable part of the universe's structure, then emptiness is no longer a failure of formation. It is another form of shape. Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "We shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want." In the universe, voids are like the hollow of the vessel, not what was forgotten, but what allows everything else to exist as it does. Cosmic voids are not completely empty. They contain diffuse gas, low-density dark matter, and sometimes solitary fragile galaxies, living very different lives from those embedded in dense filaments. Star formation there is slower. Collisions are rarer. History unfolds more gently. Time, in a sense, is softer. There is a quiet beauty in this. In the crowded regions of the universe, everything is collided, shaped by intense gravity. But in voids, galaxies are given space to not be acted upon. They do not need to merge. They do not need to erupt. They do not need to shine brightly in order to exist. Baruch Spinoza wrote, "In ethics, peace is not an absence of war, but a virtue, a state of mind." Void is not the absence of matter, but a condition, one in which forces allow stillness to endure. From here, the story reaches deeply into human experience. We are often afraid of emptiness, afraid of pauses, afraid of periods with no clear progress. We label them wasted, lost, directionless. But cosmic voids whisper another possibility. Some empty spaces are necessary for structure not to collapse. If the universe were only walls and filaments, everything would be too dense, too tense, too fast. Voids are what allow the cosmic web to breathe. Martin Heidegger wrote, "In being and time, not being is a constitutive part of being. Non-being is not the opposite of being. It is part of it." Inner life has its voids as well. Times with no clear purpose, days without strong emotion, phases without achievement. We often rush to fill them with noise, with activity, with explanations. But the universe does not hurry to fill its voids. It leaves them in place for billions of years as part of the whole. There is something deeply healing in that permission. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But perhaps after chaos, what is needed is not another star, but a space wide enough where nothing needs to be born at all. Voids have form. They are not formless. They are defined by the filaments around them. It is precisely the absence of matter that makes them visible. This is the paradox. We can see a void only because there is structure surrounding it. And so it is with us. We recognize silence only because there has been noise. We understand rest only after exhaustion. We discover the value of emptiness only after living too long in density. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. But sometimes the heart does not need to be filled. Sometimes it needs to be emptied a little so it does not break." Cosmic voids expand over time. As the universe grows, matter clusters more tightly in filaments and empty regions grow larger, clearer. In a very real sense, the universe is creating more empty space. Not to lose anything, but to balance. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Void is not a place we go to escape. It is a place we go to remain with ourselves, unpulled, unrequired. As you listen to this chapter in the night, try to feel the empty spaces within you. Do not rush to fill them. Do not rush to name them. Simply notice that they have shape boundaries. Function. They are not meaningless. Absence has structure. Silence has rhythm. Emptiness is doing important work. The universe is not built only of stars and galaxies. It is built of the spaces between them. And it is those spaces that allow light to travel far, structures to endure, time itself to slow. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like a cosmic void. No demands, no pressure, no need to fill, only a space wide enough to allow you not to be anything at all, and to rest within the shaped stillness of the universe as the story of cosmic voids comes to rest spaces with form, silences that allow structure to breathe. Perhaps a very light feeling has appeared within you. That absence is not a mistake. That emptiness does not necessarily need to be filled. And from that quiet acceptance, the night carries us toward a force even more discreet than darkness itself. A force that does not shape, does not support, does not connect, but gently pulls everything away from everything else. This is dark energy. If dark matter is the skeleton that holds the universe together, then dark energy is the breath that causes that skeleton to stretch. Not loudly, not explosively, Simply as a silent, irresistible tendency, the distance between all things increases with time. The universe is not merely growing, it is being pulled apart. What is most unsettling is this, that expansion is not slowing as we once believed. It is accelerating. Galaxies move away from one another ever faster, not because they are running, but because the space between them is expanding. The very fabric of reality is being stretched. Here, human intuition begins to falter. We are accustomed to forces that pull inward: gravity, attachment, convergence. We are far less familiar with a force that pushes outward, not through conflict, not through collision, but simply through the nature of space itself. Albert Einstein once called it the cosmological constant and later doubted himself. Dark energy arrives like a very human reminder. Some things are true not because they make sense, but because they are happening. Blaise Pascal wrote in Pensée, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me. That silence, when extended and accelerated, ceases to be fear, it becomes destiny." Dark energy does not gather anywhere. It is everywhere, evenly distributed, indifferent. It requires no special conditions to exist. And so as matter becomes more diffuse over time, dark energy grows ever more dominant, like a whisper that slowly increases in volume as everything else falls quiet. This leads us to a final question, distant and slow. What is the fate of all things? If this trend continues, galaxies will drift so far apart that light will no longer bridge the gap. Clusters will become isolated. Star systems will dissolve. Eventually, even the most tightly bound structures may be stretched apart, not through violence, but because distance prevails. This ending is not dramatic, not apocalyptic, not explosive. It resembles a farewell that lasts trillions of years, where everyone is quietly carried away, too occupied with drifting to say goodbye. Martin Heidegger wrote, "In being and time being toward death is the anticipation of a possibility." On the cosmic scale, death is not an event, it is a tendency, a curve extending outward. And it is here that philosophy begins to touch healing. For if everything ultimately expands, then holding on is not a sustainable strategy. Attachment cannot be forced. Closeness cannot be frozen. In human life, there are relationships, phases, even versions of ourselves that do not break, they simply move apart. No fault, no failure, only distance increasing over time. And sometimes trying to hold on only deepens the pain. Epictetus wrote in Enchiridion, "Do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do happen." Dark energy teaches a very quiet lesson, acceptance of direction. The universe is not sad about expanding. It does not panic at the prospect of isolation. It simply continues according to its nature. And perhaps peace lies not in resisting expansion, but in living fully within the moments of closeness that still remain. As you listen to this chapter in the night, you do not need to think about the end of time. Think instead about just enough distance, distance to breathe, distance to love without possession, distance to stay without clinging. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, for what could more aptly fit your needs." If expansion is the thread of the universe, then every moment of closeness is a temporary gift. Dark energy does not erase meaning. It places a horizon around it. It makes every meeting precious, every quiet night deeper, every touch complete, because it does not last forever. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in The Gay Science, "We should consider every day lost on which we have not danced at least once. Not to dance against fate, but to dance while there is still a floor." And if there is healing here, it is the relief of releasing the expectation of permanence. Not everything needs to stay. Not every bond must be fixed in place. Some things are beautiful precisely because they are moving away, and because of that, we learn to cherish them. As this thought softens, dark energy becomes less frightening. It turns into a background rhythm, reminding us that life is not about holding tight, but about accompanying movement. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like a gentle expansion. No tearing, no urgency. Just distance opening very slowly enough for you to breathe deeply enough to let go without pain, and to rest in the tender truth that everything will one day drift apart, but this moment is still here, warm and enough. As the story of dark energy comes to a close, of the force that stretches everything apart, of the fate of a universe growing ever thinner and quieter, perhaps a very strange feeling remains within you, that everything will eventually drift away. That distance is an irreversible tendency. And just as we begin to grow accustomed to this idea of letting go, the universe whispers another paradox, something that runs entirely counter to expansion. For within a universe being pulled apart, there still exist places that do not let go of anything at all. Places that do not allow light to escape, places that seem to compress time rather than letting it drift away. These are the supermassive black holes that by all expectations should not exist. TON 618 is one of them, a supermassive black hole at the heart of a distant quasar with a mass tens of billions of times that of the Sun. Not merely large, but far too large for the age of the universe at the moment its light was emitted. According to familiar models, there should not have been enough time for a black hole to grow so quickly. Not enough matter, not enough accretion cycles, not enough history. And yet, there it is. Like a dark punctuation mark on the cosmic map, forcing every theory to pause, to breathe, and to admit something has happened that we do not yet understand. Supermassive black holes are usually described as the end result of accumulation. Stars die, gas falls inward, mass increases over time. But black holes like TON 618 pose an unsettling question if they were already so massive when the universe was very young. Where did they begin? Did they form from enormous seeds shortly after the Big Bang, from the direct collapse of primordial gas clouds, or from mechanisms that current science has not yet learned how to name? Here a gap appears in the history of the universe, not a gap in space, but a gap in the story we tell ourselves. Karl Popper wrote in The Logic of Scientific Discovery, "Science does not rest upon rock bottom. The bold structure of its theories rises, as it were, above a swamp." These supermassive black holes remind us that the foundations of knowledge are not solid stone but soft ground where exceptions can surface at any time. But if we listen with the slow rhythm of the night, black holes are more than scientific challenges. They are metaphors for accumulation that happens too quickly, for things that grow larger before we are ready to understand them, for experiences, responsibilities, grief, or roles that arrive earlier than the mind's capacity to digest them. There are things in life that do not develop gradually. They arrive already immense, a loss too early, a burden before its time, an awareness deeper than the surrounding world. We often call these things abnormal, but the universe does not rush to judge. Black holes do not ask permission to exist. They do not wait for reasonable conditions. They are simply there, bending space, slowing time, and forcing everything around them to adjust. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time that which is ontically closest and well known is ontologically farthest and least known. Black holes sit at the very centers of galaxies, yet remain the least understood, just as there are parts very close within ourselves for which we have never had language. TON 608 does not destroy the universe. It does not devour everything chaotically. In fact, many galaxies require a central black hole to remain stable. Gas flows are regulated. Star formation is moderated. Order is maintained not through gentleness, but through absolute gravity. There is a very quiet comfort in this, that what is unbearably heavy is not necessarily negative, that certain masses, when placed correctly, can keep everything else from flying apart. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." But black holes do not fight. They are gravity. They do not choose, they do not resist, they simply exist, and their existence shapes the environment around them. The mystery of how supermassive black holes formed so early reminds us that not all processes follow the healthy pace we expect. Some things grow in darkness faster than any prediction, not because they are wrong, but because the universe is wider than our models. In inner life, there are black holes as well, regions that draw energy inward, heavy memories, unanswered questions. We often fear them, avoid them, try to illuminate them. But black holes do not respond to light, they respond only to approach. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Perhaps strength lies not in removing the heavy masses within us, but in placing them into stable orbits so they do not consume everything else. Supermassive black holes pose a final, deeply human question: what happens when something within us becomes too large, too early? Do we force it into a pre-existing mold, or do we reshape the entire structure around it so that we can live alongside it? The universe chooses the second option. It does not erase Ton 618. It restructures itself to contain Ton 618. And as you listen to this chapter in the night, perhaps there is something within you that should not exist by ordinary standards, a deep sorrow, a vast thought, a heavy awareness. Let the black hole remind you that existence does not need to be reasonable in order to have a place. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart, but sometimes the heart is not just full, it is heavy, and that is not wrong." As this thought settles, the black hole is no longer a terrifying abyss. It becomes a silent center where time slows, where movement grows more deliberate. Not to consume, but to hold. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like a stable orbit around a great mass, not falling in, not fleeing, simply remaining far enough to be safe, close enough to be held, and resting in the gentle truth that even what is too large, too early, can still have its place in the universe. As the story of supermassive black holes that should not exist slowly settles of masses too large appearing too early, forcing the universe itself to bend in order to contain them, perhaps a heavy feeling lingers within you, not fear, but awe. The sense that there are entities which do not merely curve space, but cause time itself to hesitate as if the familiar flow of life must slow its step when passing near them. And it is here that the night's journey crosses another threshold. No longer a story about mass or gravity, but about time, that thing we assume to be absolute, steady beyond negotiation, beginning to reveal its fragility. Because near neutron stars and black holes, time slows down. Not in imagination, not as metaphor, but in mathematics, in measurement, in experiment. A clock placed near a strong gravitational field runs more slowly than a clock far away. Two rhythms of life diverge not because of error, not because of malfunction, but because the shape of reality itself has changed. Here, time is no longer a single current shared by all. It becomes local, dependent on position, dependent on mass, dependent on how space itself is curved. Albert Einstein wrote in Relativity, the Special and the General Theory, "The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. The universe, through frenzied neutron stars and immense black holes, makes that illusion begin to tremble." Time is not a clock hanging on the wall of the cosmos. It is geometry, a part of space-time itself, capable of being stretched, bent, slowed, even brought almost to a standstill at the edge of an event horizon. Near a black hole, for a distant observer, all motion appears to freeze. An object falling in never quite crosses the boundary within finite time. It is stretched out like a farewell that never ends. And there is a quiet beauty in this, that some moments do not need to end only to slow down until before and after can no longer be distinguished. Henri Bergson wrote in Time and Free Will, "Time is not a thing but a process." And nature, through its most extreme structures, shows that this process is uneven. There are places where time rushes, places where it drifts, places where it almost stands still. Nature, in this sense, is a machine that bends time, not out of cruelty, not by intention, but as a consequence of mass and energy shaping the form of reality itself. When space curves, time must curve with it. There is no alternative. Here, science touches something deeply human, because every one of us has lived in different tempos of time. There are years that pass so quickly they barely leave a trace, days so long they feel endless, moments of grief that stretch on as if time itself has chosen to stay there. Marcel Proust wrote in Search of Lost Time, "Remembrance of things past is not necessarily the remembrance of things as they were. Memory does not obey clocks, pain does not follow calendars, neither does comfort. Inner time has never been absolute, and the universe is simply confirming this truth through physics. Near neutron stars, time dilation is not just a number. It is a reminder that some beings live more slowly, not out of laziness, not from stagnation, but because the environment around them is heavier, the pressure greater, the gravitational field stronger, and comparing their rhythm of life to that of others becomes meaningless. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. But perhaps what matters more is this: do not measure your life by someone else's clock. If time is geometry, then every life is a unique trajectory through space-time. No one follows the same path. No one experiences the same curvature. Forcing all experience into a single rhythm only creates exhaustion. There is something gently healing in realizing this slowing down is not falling behind. Standing still is not failure. There are regions in the universe where time nearly stops, and they are no less real. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, time is not something which exists first, and then we enter into. We do not move through time. We are woven by time differently at each position, each mass, each story. As you listen to this chapter in the night, you do not need to think about equations or event horizons. Simply listen to your own inner rhythm. Perhaps you are close to a black hole in your life. A heavy responsibility, a deep loss, an unanswered question that causes your time to move more slowly than others. This is not wrong. It simply means your space-time is curved in its own way. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, all joy wants eternity. But perhaps what we truly need is not eternity, but permission to remain a little longer within a moment. Near black holes, time stretches. Near neutron stars, life's rhythm shifts. And on very quiet nights as you lie listening to these stories, time itself may slow just a little. Not because of gravity, but because the mind has stopped rushing. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like a gently curved region of space-time. No urgency, no counting. Just a moment extended long enough that you do not need to go anywhere at all. Here, there is no before or after. Only being, and that in the universe as in sleep is already peaceful enough. As the story of time no longer being absolute slowly settles as we accept that the rhythm of life can bend slow, even come close to standing still. A very strange feeling begins to arise. It is no longer awe before mass or speed, but a boundary. A point beyond which, no matter how patient we are, no matter how much time slows down, there are still things we cannot cross. And from this very realization, the night's journey carries us to the final edge that science can reach the edge of the observable universe. This is not a wall, not the place where the universe ends, but the place where light has not yet arrived. The universe has an age, light has a speed, and because of this, only what is close enough or old enough can send a signal to us. Beyond that boundary, there may exist countless galaxies, stars, structures, perhaps even different laws of physics, yet their light has never reached human eyes. Not because they are unreal, but because time has not been sufficient. This limit is called the cosmic horizon, a boundary of space-time where knowledge stops not for lack of curiosity, but for lack of access. We cannot see farther, cannot measure farther, cannot know farther, at least not in the way we understand knowing. Immanuel Kant wrote in Critique of Pure Reason, we can cognize of things only what we ourselves have put into them. At the edge of the observable universe, we face the inverse things that exist without ever having been touched by our cognition. And there is a very quiet beauty in this, that the universe does not fully open itself to humanity, that some parts are held back not as punishment, but as a condition of humility. What lies beyond the cosmic horizon is not a secret demanding urgent decoding. It asks no questions. It demands no answers. It simply exists in a state of being that has no relationship to an observer. And perhaps it is precisely this lack of relationship that makes it pure. Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent. Here, silence is not a deficiency, it is the appropriate response. The observable universe is like a sphere of light surrounding us, not a center, not a privilege, merely a range of contact. We are within it not because the universe chose us, but because this is where light has had time to arrive. And this touches human experience very deeply. For in life, there are similar horizons, questions without immediate answers, truths not yet knowable, people we cannot fully understand no matter how long we try. We often treat limits as failure, but the universe does not. It builds an entire aesthetic around not being able to know everything. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, the mystery does not get clearer by being explained. Some things retain their depth only when they are not pulled into the light. If everything could be observed, if no boundary remained, if nothing were out of reach, curiosity would die, and with it the gentleness in how we approach the world. The cosmic horizon reminds us that not every form of existence needs to become knowledge. Some things only need to be respected from a distance. In sleep, we cross a similar boundary. We do not carry every thought with us. We do not resolve every question. We leave part of consciousness behind and step into a realm where memory, dreaming, and the unconscious operate by their own laws, without control, without full observation. And precisely because of this, sleep heals. Carl Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. What lies outside the light of consciousness is not a threat, it is a necessary remainder." Beyond the cosmic horizon, there may exist versions of history we will never know, but that does not make our history less meaningful. It simply places it where it belongs, one story among countless possible stories. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. The cosmic horizon is the greatest silence of all, not hostile, not answering, simply present. And in that presence, we learn how to live without absolute guarantees. There is a very deep healing in accepting this, that there will always be things we do not know. That knowledge does not need to be complete for life to have meaning. That boundaries do not always need to be crossed." Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. The cosmic horizon is the ultimate reminder of this. Every observation has limits, and that does not make it worthless. As you listen to this chapter in the night, you do not need to imagine galaxies never seen. Think instead of the questions you do not yet need to answer, the paths you do not yet need to understand, the parts of yourself that do not yet need to be named. They do not disappear because you cannot see them. They simply have not yet arrived at the moment of being known. And perhaps peace does not lie in expanding the horizon without end, but in resting within the current circle of light wide enough to breathe, distant enough not to be consumed by the need for control." Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Human, All Too Human, "One must learn to love oneself with a healthy and sane love." Perhaps loving oneself also means accepting that not every part of life must be illuminated at once. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like an edge of light where knowledge comes gently to rest, where questions are set down, where you no longer need to know anything more in order to be allowed to rest. Out there may be infinity, but here in this moment, the circle of light is warm enough and sleep can arrive as a quiet trust in what is not yet known. As the story of the edge of the observable universe comes to a close where light stops and knowledge learns how to be silent, perhaps a very delicate feeling arises within you. That beyond that edge there is not nothingness but the not yet known. That silence is not emptiness but a promise not yet fulfilled. And from that rim of quiet at times, the universe sends back brief signs not enough to explain but enough to awaken. These are signals from the void. Fast radio bursts, far bees. They arrive without warning. They last only a few milliseconds. The energy released in that instant can rival the sun's output over many days. And then they vanish. No greeting, no farewell, only a trace of noise in the data, and a question that is not yet fully formed. FRBs are not explosions. They are more like whispers, too fast to grasp, too distant to touch. Some signals appear only once, like a blink from the universe. Others repeat without a steady rhythm, as if something were gently tapping on the wall of reality, not to break it, but to remind us something is here. Science has gone far in tracing their origins. Magnetars, violent starquakes, extreme plasma environments, all are candidates. Yet no matter which hypothesis seems strongest today, FRBs retain a portion that remains unanswered. Not because data is lacking, but because the data is not enough to close the story. And it is precisely this openness that carries a rare kind of beauty. Blaise Pascal wrote in Pensée, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me. But FRBs whisper something else. The universe is not completely silent. It does not speak often. It does not explain itself. But sometimes it responds very softly. These signals do not carry messages in the way humans expect. They do not spell words. They do not encode emotions. They do not tell stories. They are simply events. Occurrences, small points in the ocean of time. And perhaps because of this, they are trustworthy. They do not persuade. They do not instruct. They simply are." Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." FRBs respect that boundary. They speak just enough not to force understanding, only to invite listening. There is something deeply healing in knowing that not every signal needs to be decoded immediately. Some things arrive to confirm connection, not to deliver content. Like a knock on the door in the night, not demanding you open it, only reminding you that you are not entirely alone. In human life, there are FRBs too. Brief moments of meaning, a chance sentence, a memory that suddenly returns, a warmth that appears and fades. They do not last. They do not repeat on schedule. Yet they are enough to change the direction of a night. Henri Bergson wrote in Creative Evolution, "The present is not what is, but what is being made." FRBs are the present in its purest form, arriving, happening, and leaving. Leaving behind a possibility. What makes FRBs special is not only their intensity or distance, but their uncertainty. We do not know when they will come. We do not know why some repeat. We do not know whether a hidden order lies beneath them. And within this haze, curiosity is not exhausted. It is sustained. Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time. The most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking. FRBs compel a different kind of thinking, not toward closure, but toward staying with the question. The universe, it seems, does not need to speak loudly to be heard. It sends signals just strong enough to show that silence does not mean absence. That between the gaps there is a pulse. Between the voids there is an echo, brief, thin, but real. Carl Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good." Signals from the void can be heard as echoes of a cosmic unconscious not needing to be fully understood to have their effect. And then there are repeating FRBs. They return from the same region of sky as if that place has its own rhythm. Not regular, not predictable, yet familiar enough to be recognized. Their repetition does not diminish the mystery, it deepens it. Like a dream that returns night after night, not to be decoded, but to remind. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Everything is only for a day, both that which remembers and that which is remembered." FRBs remind us that brevity does not lessen value. On the contrary, it concentrates it. As you listen to this chapter in the night, notice the smallest sounds around you. The wind, your breath, a passing thought. No need to hold them, no need to follow them. Just recognize that life often speaks very quietly. FRBs do not come to answer the greatest questions. They come to dissolve an old assumption that the universe is silent. No, the universe whispers, and if we learn to listen without demanding, those whispers are enough to let us feel connected. Albert Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart. But sometimes the heart does not need to be filled. It needs a brief signal to know it is moving in the right direction." Signals from the void do not ask you to believe in anything. They do not call for grand hope. They confirm something very modest. Between emptiness there is rhythm. Within darkness there is sound. At the edge of light there is a response, however brief. And as that thought settles, the night becomes softer. You do not need to seek a message. You do not need to decode the universe. Just let these brief signals do what they do best: awaken listening. Let this chapter lull you into sleep like an FRB arriving very softly, lasting very briefly, then gone, yet enough for you to know that even within the void, the universe is still speaking, and you simply by listening are already part of that conversation. As the brief signals from the void fade, those FRBs arriving and departing like the breath of the universe. Perhaps a very strange feeling arises within you, not the satisfaction of having an answer, but the softening of the question itself. As if after listening long enough, you no longer need the universe to explain anything further. And it is precisely in this moment that the journey of silent orbit comes to a close, not with a definitive conclusion, but with a final realization deeply human, that the universe was never built to be easy for humans to understand. From stars that die into diamonds, to planets hotter than their parent stars, to moons with climates lightless oceans. Stars that survive annihilation and structures larger than theory itself allows. Each chapter has not merely told the story of a physical anomaly. Together they have quietly repeated the same message: reality has no obligation to fit our intuition. We grow up in a world of rules, cause and effect, before and after. input and outcome. These patterns help us survive, build, predict. But when we carry the same tools into the universe, we begin to encounter an unsettling truth: rules only hold until an exception appears. And exceptions are not rare, they are everywhere. Karl Popper wrote in The Logic of Scientific Discovery, "No number of experiments can ever prove me right. A single experiment can prove me wrong. Science does not advance through certainty, but through the willingness to be mistaken." The universe seems to operate by that same spirit. It does not repeat itself to be easily understood. It continuously transcends itself. Each time humanity believes it has grasped the larger picture, a model, a theory, a complete framework, the universe places a fracture within it. Not loudly, not provocatively, just enough to require a shift in perspective. Yet perhaps the most profound insight is not that the universe is complex, but that we continue trying to understand it, even while knowing that such understanding will always be provisional. Albert Einstein once said in Ideas and Opinions, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." The sentence is both praise and paradox, because upon reflection we see that the universe is only partially understandable. The remainder, perhaps the greater part, appears designed to remain beyond reach. And perhaps that is not a flaw, but a gift. For if the universe were entirely transparent, if everything obeyed simple rules, if there were no anomalies, no blurred regions, no open questions, human consciousness would have nowhere to grow. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." But perhaps the deeper lesson is not to avoid the abyss, it is to learn how to look without needing to conquer it. Silent Orbit was never a journey meant to fully understand the universe. It was a journey to travel far enough and then learn how to stop before places light cannot reach, to stop before questions without answers, to stop before the truth that not everything that exists in order to be understood. In Eastern philosophy, Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao." And in a sense, the universe is such a Tao, the more we try to grasp it with words, the more it slips away. Yet this does not make the journey meaningless. On the contrary, meaning does not reside at the destination. It resides in the state of mind the journey creates. After passing through anomalies, exception structures beyond norms, invisible forces and impassable limits, perhaps within you a different kind of stillness has formed. Not the stillness of ignorance, but the stillness of acceptance. Acceptance that you do not need to understand everything in order to live fully. You do not need to control the universe to find peace. You do not need a final answer to have meaning. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together." Perhaps we can extend this further: accept the universe as it is without forcing it to fit the shape of the self. The universe is not hostile to humanity, nor is it preferential. It is indifferent, and it is precisely this indifference that opens a strange kind of freedom. For when we are no longer the center, we grow lighter. When we no longer need to understand everything, we are allowed to rest. When we no longer have to conquer reality, we can coexist with it. Carl Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." And perhaps human wholeness does not come from turning the universe into a simple diagram, but from accepting the coexistence of knowing and not knowing. Now, as the final chapter closes, no new truth is handed down. No ultimate secret is revealed. What remains is something very soft, the sense that living in a complex universe is not a burden, but an opportunity to be humble, curious, and gentler with oneself. You do not need to carry everything you have heard. Let it dissolve like starlight after dawn. Keep only one thing if you wish: that you live within a universe that continuously transcends itself, and therefore you do not need to remain fixed. You are allowed to change, allowed to be uncertain, allowed to rest within a question. And now, as the voice slows, as the silent orbit completes its arc, let your mind do what it does best at night: let go. No need to understand further. No need to keep thinking. Just be present, like a very small point, drifting gently within a universe that does not require you to understand it, yet remains vast enough to hold you in peace. And now, as this long journey gently comes to a close, as diamond-born dead stars, Impossible planets, lightless oceans, invisible forces, temporal limits, and even the fragile signals from the void slowly settle like stardust in the night, allow every question to rest as well. You do not need to carry knowledge with you. You do not need to remember names. You do not need to hold on to any detail. These stories did not come to make you more alert, but to make you lighter. The universe we have just passed through is not a problem waiting for a solution, but a space in which awareness can loosen its grip. It is vast, it is strange, and it does not ask to be understood. Perhaps the most comforting thing about the universe is not that it has order, but that even within chaos, even within exceptions, everything is allowed to exist, just like you. If anything lingers at the very end, let it not be a thought but a feeling, faint, soft, and gentle, that you do not need to become someone else, do not need to understand life completely, do not need to control tomorrow. You have traveled far enough for tonight. Let your breathing slow. Let your body release. Let your mind drift lightly, like a small planet, quietly entering the tender darkness of sleep. The universe is still there. The questions are still there. But for now, you do not need to reach for them anymore. Wishing you a peaceful night. And if you have already fallen asleep, that is perfectly fine too. Silent Orbit has completed one full revolution.